G'day, Rockhound here. So founders have had access to Mavericks the Forge for a little over a week now. Now I was lucky enough yesterday to sit down with Lawrence Barnett, who is a senior game designer with the game's developer Automaton. We had an extensive chat about various aspects of the Forge, including gunplay, time to kill, world density and environment, spawning, amongst other things. There's a lot of detail in here, and I know you guys will enjoy listening to what Lawrence has to say about the game. Understandably, there were a few things that we couldn't go into, but I think we managed to cover a lot of info about the game as it currently is, and how that will influence the development of the game going into the future. So let's check it out. G'day Lawrence, thanks for taking the time to chat with me about Mavericks the Forge. Before we talk about the game, can you just take a moment to tell us a little bit more about how you got involved with Automaton and Mavericks, and specifically what your role within the development team is?
So I finished university a couple of years ago, and I've been doing some work experience prior to that. So I've previously worked at Sega and a little bit at Gameloft, which is a mobile studio. And I was quite interested in trying out a studio that's a little bit younger, a little bit more flexible, not quite so sort of regimented. So I had an interview with James and Ollie, and it really went from there. Like they had a lot of energy, and that was exciting. And they wanted to bring me on to help kick off their next game. So Deceit had been launched. And there's big ambitions to really try and push that space. They tried FPSs, and they really wanted to extend that, do something massive and open world.
So had Mavericks as a game concept been developed at that point?
Not formally. It was more like we've got some, like, basically, there's a few opinions as to what was working or what wasn't working in the market, and Destiny, that could have been so much more, and PUBG, that's doing some really interesting things, and we'd like to kind of capitalize on all these things. So then, I sort of started sitting down and fleshing through some ideas, very high level. Back when I started last summer, of how can I bring these ideas together, and that formed Mavericks basically. So we also, a huge amount of the team here has a lot of experience, both professionally and personally, with RuneScape, and a lot of us feel that does represent, whilst it's very limited, it does represent MMOs really quite well, and it sets a great precedent for progression. And in the latter years, they've not done quite so well at it, but monetization models that support the studio and the way that the developers want to develop their games, so the longevity that ensues with an MMO. So that kind of all came together into Mavericks. So this concept of an open world that we're playing now, this is like our sandbox. This is our, you jump in for 10 minutes or you jump in for 10 hours, and it's there. It's your sandbox. You go and have fun, go and muck around. It's a very soft session. And then we want to complement that with something very competitive. And we've got a lot of CSGO players in the office. PUBG, I think for me, is the session length obviously causes some impracticality, but it's very immersive. Getting pulled into a 40-minute game. I think so we're talking June 2017 here, but even back then, so Fortnite hadn't come along yet, but I do think that the slightly shorter sessions, I do prefer them. I think they're a bit better. But yeah, PUBG really stood out as doing something quite different in the FPS space. I played H1Z1 before. I actually spent a lot of time before they went king of the king of the hill, or king of the kill. It's such a tongue twister. So I mean, they'd been doing some interesting stuff, but yeah, it's fascinating how it just didn't quite capture it for me, and obviously for a lot of other people, that essence of PUBG.
Yeah, and I think that kind of leads me to my first question about Mavericks, which is that Mavericks has this potential to bring in players from all sorts of different FPS backgrounds. So from PUBG, H1Z1, from Battlefield, from Call of Duty, from slower paced games like Armour and DayZ, and even players from Fortnite. And the common thread that kind of links all those different players is that they really want to see good gunplay. Now, you've mentioned previously that in Mavericks, the team was trying to infuse a pseudo-realistic shooting experience, which had sort of slick shooting from the likes of Battlefield, but had a twist of strong mastery and realism in there. So with the first week of the Forge gone and the changes that you've made so far, how close do you think you're starting to get to that level of gunplay in the game?
It's been a really interesting journey. So there are still a few areas of gunplay that we haven't yet implemented, so it's quite hard to comment on like a final. I mean, there'll never be a final version. We will just continue to balance and iterate this. But for example, damage over range, a drop off, that is not a thing yet.
Okay.
So that's a big part that will come into play shortly. Another one is the move stat. So you don't move faster with an SMG or a pistol at the moment. So
like when you're running across countryside?
Yes, when you're running. Your whole expect a sort of 5 to 10% movement speed buff with a pistol, and then maybe a 5% with a SMG. So there's a few little things to come, but even with what we have today, which is the large majority of it, it's been very interesting. Only 2 days ago on Tuesday, we got some really good feedback regarding recoil. I sat with Henrik, Wacky Jackie.
Oh, that's great.
And went through some of that stuff with him. That was really, really useful. So basically, I went back through, and it'll be in the build. It's quite interesting. We haven't released it wasn't in the patch notes, and we're going to put a little post out today with some images of the new spray patterns. But I don't know if you've noticed it last night playing, but there is much more random deviation within the recoil. So you know how we've discussed this spray pattern, the recoil pattern. Spray pattern for CSGO players, recoil pattern for PUBG and Battlefield. That spray pattern now, it has a lot more random variation within it. It doesn't deviate too much within individual shots, but the randomization that can occur with each shot means that a whole total spray can end up looking quite different to another. And that came off the back of, quite simply and honestly, not having a pro player in our office. So this, this journey is like, I'm learning a huge amount. I know Joel, who's a really talented engineer who helps set up the weapons. We're sat watching some videos of like unlisted gameplay, and we're, pretty taken aback by how good some of these players are, and how quickly they learn things. And I think, if nothing else, it just reminds me, like, you just have to respect that there will be, like, you basically have to respect that you won't know what's going to happen, and they will just move the dials and they will figure things out. I think that's nice, and that's exactly what the Forge is for.
Yeah, so you could set the skill ceiling super high, and those best players are going to reach it pretty quickly. Yeah,
exactly. And some of them reached it in a day. For example,
it's been a bit hard for...
Sorry, go on.
It's been a bit hard for me to judge what gunplay is like, because I've had a few ping issues, me being here in New Zealand and playing on an NA server. Right. And so what I've found is that sometimes I will see multiple hit markers, but then when I've chatted to the player I was engaging with just after that, they've said that they've actually only taken a small amount of the damage that I actually saw in game.
Is that something just recently?
No, it's pretty much been from day one. So I notice it when I'm shooting, and also when I'm moving around corners. Sometimes I'll get shot afterwards as well. But the big one was when I shoot them multiple times and don't really seem to get the damage I was expecting.
Yeah, that's not good. It is client side, so it's really that's awkward. I need to investigate that.
So what I see, my side, as far as hits go, should be registering.
Yeah. But we actually validate things on the server, but the damage is dealt client side. So basically, if I shoot you, like I say to the server, take 25 health off Rockhound.
Gotcha.
So there should never be, and obviously there's a compromise there between security and like fluidity. So it's actually much cheaper. It's generally better to do client side damage just because there's not the possibility that the server has to compute that and then sync it back to two clients at once. Whereas client side, whilst it's simpler, you're just basically broadcasting a message rather than having a communication. It's easier to cheat with, because if someone does just hit all the clients, then the server needs to validate quite quickly that isn't or shouldn't be allowed, and then stop that happening. But yeah, that certainly shouldn't happen at all.
I guess at the same time, having a high ping, I probably shouldn't receive an advantage from that either, over players that have a low ping.
Yeah, but James talked about this a long time ago, but basically what we'll end up doing is prioritizing clients based on their ping. So let's say that you're running to run behind a wall. Oh, sorry, let's say that someone else is looking at you and you're running towards a wall. We will give priority to the player with the lower ping and sync that information to the higher ping. And there's only you're gonna piss someone off here. Either the guy with high ping,
it should be me, right? That's being pissed off.
Yeah, you're the one with. So we'll experiment with that, but it's something we're aware of. Not that makes any difference in the short term, but we're aware of it.
So as far as other aspects of gunplay go, I noticed from the first day of play to now that there's been quite a change, especially with this last patch.
Yeah.
So pistols, for instance, which effectively were long-range sniper weapons on the first few days, have been changed with the last patch and been nerfed considerably.
Yes, I changed them quite dramatically.
Yeah, and I've noticed now that in anything over a short distance away, it's pretty hard to actually hit anything with a pistol. It's gone from one extreme to the other. So the pistols really are ineffective at long range now, to the point where you really can't hit anything.
Interesting. I wonder whether that is to do with. So what I've done is basically added about. On the UI, about a 10% spread. So what it'll do if you're standing still and you shoot against anything close range. So let's say you shoot at a door 20 meters away. You will, by and large, hit the head if that dot is on the head, but it's not guaranteed. Do the same thing at 30 to 40 meters, and you might hit the shoulder, you might miss. It gets a bit ambiguous. The problem is we also have, and I feel like this maybe isn't communicated enough in the UI, and that might be the problem. It might not be, but it's worth checking. That actually, when you move, we have something called a move shift. So when you move the character, we push your spread out. So I'm just drawing a little diagram. Next time I'll set like a little screen sharing up, because it's just quite nice to visualize this stuff. But yeah, the spread gets increased as you move around, very similar to any other shooter. And there's a shift on that. So the moment you start moving, we offset the spread. And then as you're moving, you experience. Now, this is scaled based on weapon class. With the pistol, you experience, it's either 5 or 10% more spread. I think it's actually 5%. So it's not a great deal, but it amplifies your spread based on the fact that you're moving.
So players that have rapid left and right movements to avoid being hit, or AD spam as it's known, would have reduced accuracy?
Yeah, and they might not know. Might be the problem. Well, not necessarily a problem if they don't know that change has gone in, because the UI, I feel, maybe isn't being clear enough about that. That we have a bug in where the spread is not actually accurately represented with the crosshairs at the moment. So with the Barrett is a really good example. If you spam the Barrett, even if a target is 5 meters away, you will be spraying, but your bullets will basically be anywhere between 5 meters up and down. Left and right, up, down. It's massive, but the UI doesn't support going that wide yet.
Yeah, so like with the Ithaca 37, when you jump over a wall and aim at the same time.
Yeah, it goes massive.
Okay, so with Mavericks sort of almost fulfilling two roles, like it's got the MMO, which can be slower paced if you want it to be. Then it's going to be the Battle Royale, which can have high paced, almost like Battlefield style moments in it as well. How do you find a good compromise between those two? So you can have slow paced gunplay if you want it, but you can also have that super fast, Call of Duty, Battlefield style, almost arcadey moments as well within the game.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I think what's key to both of those modes, which makes it, I think, somewhat easier to balance, is that we don't want a super fast time to kill. I think what Battle Royale and DayZ, H1Z1, this open world survival element is somewhat a war of attrition. I've got more health packs than you. I don't need to, basically, I can try and poke you down. Even if you're a better shot than me, I can refill my health 4 times. I'm keeping a distance of you. I'm controlling my cover, if you like. You're going to have to push to me, and every time you do, I'm going to try and knock you down. And sure, you deal more damage, but I've got the cover, I've got the positional advantage, and I'll heal up. And that's actually to test that and ensure that that's actually what's going on, and that there is objective play. That's what the capital deposit points are in the map for. That's what the CRT system is there for, is to pull players around and ensure that you're fighting over something, and because you're fighting over that thing, we're basically establishing a pace. And to answer your question, so if we first just quickly talk about time to kill, it's currently set at about twice that of a classic Call of Duty experience, which puts it probably about a third, I believe, more than Battlefield, because Battlefield is extended upon COD. So I think the ban, it obviously depends. I'm speaking roughly here because it totally depends on weapon class, range. But what you'll find is typically a Call of Duty sits between, I'm just writing these down, it sits between about 0.18 and 0.25 of a second in time to kill if you put the shots in the correct places in the chest, not a headshot. Then at the latter end of that scale, we've got, say, Destiny multiplayer, where you sit at basically like I think it's about 0.6 of a second. It's quite late. I've got these in some spreadsheets. If you're interested, I can share them with you after the video.
Yeah, that would be great.
And then we've got PUBG. They sit just after Call of Duty. But what none of this data expresses is actually how the difficulty in putting these shots down. So in Call of Duty, you've got a very low time to kill, and actually the weapons are quite, like, the skill ceiling isn't that high on putting those shots down. So it's quite easy to put the shots down. If we then move to PUBG, actually it looks like it should have a very similar time to kill. but it's so much harder to put those shots down that actually you completely extend time to kill, and it doesn't end up being 0.31 of a second to take someone down with the AKM. It ends up being like almost 1.2, because if you can't, obviously this is where range is absolutely imperative, and it's somewhat silly to do the whole argument, but if we say people are at 30 meters, if you took your average player, I wouldn't be surprised if in COD, that time to kill deviates by, say, 20-30% because someone misses a few of those shots. So we'd probably be looking at like 3.5 for a 3.5 of a second point to kill, time to kill. And in PUBG, the deviation, I'm sure, is a lot higher. So we'd start probably looking at like at least 6.6 of a second in time to kill. So we've just doubled it on COD. But because if you actually put the damage down, the time to kill is the same. We've got a very high skill ceiling in that if you put those shots down and the shots are hard to put down, you'll deal a lot of damage. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think also what comes into it is the life cycle of the player. Like, how much do you have invested in the time leading up to the engagement? Sure. And so the likes of Battlefield or Call of Duty, the respawn time's, just 30 seconds or so. So, dying doesn't matter because you just respawn straight away. It's not such a big deal.
Yeah, the consequence is nothing.
Yeah, exactly. But other games, you might have spent a lot of time preparing. So you want to know that if you're in an engagement, you have opportunity to do something within that time.
Yeah, it's like anti-scaling, isn't it? That's your 40-minute session can be taken away in a blink of an eye, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's not particularly empowering. It is for the offending player, but you don't feel like there's anything you can do back. I think League of Legends recently with their patches, you can see it in a whole ton of games, like they've added structural support on the turret, so it's harder to take down turrets early, so it's harder to actually take control of the map quite so quickly. And I think Fortnite, actually, with their bloom early on, I think I'm sure they've had some really interesting choices to make where players are asking for more accurate gunplay, and they have addressed that with guns that actually are a bit more accurate and have a higher ceiling. But at the same time, I'd love to know how much of that casual audience they leave a little bit behind in doing
the skill ceiling's so high.
Yeah, because they get destroyed. So we've gone like full circle here talking about time to kill, but this was all in the context of the open world and Battle Royale and what that time to kill means and the pacing. And I think this is just a really important point here, that the way that the weapons are currently set up is that the time to kill is about 0.4, so it's longer than PUBG, but I've tried to make the gunplay a little bit more accessible. But more close to medium range, not really at long. At long range, we're not too different, and actually, it ends up being so difficult anyway that we put ourselves in a similar position to PUBG, and that's something we're probably gonna. We'll be like, we said at the beginning, we'll be playing with this stuff till the cows come home. But I think it's important that if we're ever, from a fundamental point of view, saying we want the player to scale through being in this world. Okay, you find armor, med kits, health kits. You've got all sorts of gear that can scale you up. To then take that away before you have the chance to really put anything or use any of that gear against the offender, I don't think is going to leave people particularly satisfied. So I think by extending that time to kill, by even if at specific ranges we only extend the time to kill by 0.1 or 2 of a second, that's enough for someone to jump behind cover. It's enough for someone to hopefully deploy a grenade or smack, crouch and get behind something, or sprint or jump, and it makes it all right. It makes it much harder to put down those final shots, because most of us don't have reaction times that are super fast anyway. So I think extending it that tiny bit makes a huge difference, but we'll obviously see. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think players that aren't as quick on the trigger still need opportunity to demonstrate skills, and they might be tactical skills, so they can avoid or they can flank around a player, or they've got other tactics that they can take into account to outcompete the player, even if they're not as fast as the highly skilled players. One thing that we haven't really chatted about is how Armour fits into this, because obviously that's going to extend the longevity of the player. How do you think that'll affect the game once it's brought into the Forge?
So a bit like the gunplay in the first week, and we'll see what happens with that. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of balancing around it, but from a high level perspective, what we're looking to do is introduce some fairly basic armor first. So it just kind of does what it says on the tin. We're going to have 3 tiers. So those 3 tiers will represent quality going down within a certain style, without being too specific. And then these are things that will be increasingly rare as to be found in the open world, especially in the open world and also in the Battle Royale. And I'm really excited to start tweaking that stuff. I honestly, at the moment, like specifics, I'm not set on. But like it's really important that the silhouette and the visual of that armor ties into whatever damage reduction it actually applies. So we don't have someone running around in, like, they put a nappy on them and they've now got like 3 times the health. So, and judging that against the player expectations. And of course, this time to kill that we're discussing is certainly going to be interesting, but some very rough ballpark figures. I'd expect our tier 1 to maybe provide 10 to 30% damage reduction. Our tier 2 continuing a sort of these 20%, so then it would be 30 to 50, and then maybe our rarest armor in the game just tops that out somewhere between 50 and 70% additional health. Obviously not through the health system. So if we have 100, if you're wearing tier 1 armor, obviously it doesn't work like this. It works with durability, but if you have 100 health by default with tier 1, you might be sitting at 120. Which, I mean, the best way of looking at this stuff is actually with the bullets to kill with the respective guns, because ultimately that's all that really matters. It's okay now the RK417 is a 5-shot kill, and then it's a 6-shot kill or a 7-shot kill with the final. But yeah, that is balancing that time to kill against extending what's already been slightly extended as a time to kill without diminishing.
So if you commit to emptying a magazine on someone, you want to know it works.
Well, yeah, and there's obviously a massive risk to that. You don't want to put down 6-7 shots on your average target with an assault rifle and they wander away. It's not going to feel particularly good.
So at the moment, if you are hit and you need to take health, you've got to be static to recover.
Yes.
Do you feel that there's some flexibility there so that you could have health that is if you're static, you get a full recovery or fast recovery? If you're moving, you might get a slower recovery, like walking pace is medium and sprinting is, an even slower recovery, but you do get some value. That way you can still be kind of in the gunfight and it doesn't disturb the flow of the gunfight, but you still have opportunity to have some recovery, enough to be able to re-engage with the opponent that was attacking you in the first place.
Yeah, I think we've shared, or we do share similar opinions in totally arresting control from the player. I don't think it's necessary, and I completely understand that it's super important that if I put 4 shots down on you with a pistol and you've got 20 health remaining, let's say you're 30 meters away from me, that I can chase you down, I can get to you, and you're punished for being hit with those shots. And that means you can't. The best way to put this is you can't do the Call of Duty blackout and pick up your health kit, move at 4.5 meters a second, and be full health again in 3 seconds.
No, but you might add enough health to recover from one more shot.
Yeah, and there's definitely a compromise that's appropriate. I like the idea that you don't. It's not a strict. Okay, now you can move around and heal, but actually more of the more you move around, the slower this is going to take, or the less effective this is going to be. So there's a choice that you're making there.
Yeah, it gives you tactical options.
Yeah, I'm in agreement.
And I guess
something we're definitely going to look into. And sorry, you go on. I think you're going to talk about reloading.
Yeah, you read my mind. So in Battlefield, for instance, you can reload completely on the run, so there's no impact on the actual gunfight by having to reload. You don't have to pause physically. Yeah. You can look for cover and reload at the same time, or dodge bullets and reload at the same time.
Yes.
And then re-engage in the fight. So I guess, what impact do you see on that? Do you think reloading could have some flexibility around movement as well?
Yeah, it's interesting. If we look at this whole topic of what punishments aren't the best way of describing it, but what do you lose the ability to do when you're moving at 5.2 meters a second, which is our sprint speed, versus 4.5, I think it is. What do you lose to that? What do you gain? And at the moment, and also that conversation comes into obviously like accessibility and why not being allowed to do things generally doesn't feel, especially if you're coming from a game that does allow you to do that, feel that great. But there's certainly room to look at that.
Yeah, and just because I'm used to reloading on the run in Battlefield doesn't mean I should in this game.
Yeah, exactly.
And I can get used to it in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. We've had quite a lot of feedback regarding it, and we're not super stubborn on it. So I think it's something we'll try as soon as we get the, yeah, it's not a particularly timely thing to change. So I wouldn't be too surprised if we try it in the next few weeks.
Sounds good.
And see what the reception is, because I think that's ultimately what this entire period is about. It's about gauging and chatting to you guys and seeing what you like and what you don't like and how that affects the game. And I don't think we're not in a position where we can't refactor elements of the design and the character controller without it causing catastrophic effect. It's not there's not a whole massive, dependency sheet of, if you do that and all of these things will change. We're just talking about how punishing the game is and how accessible the game is. And I think Battlefield's a really nice example where it doesn't break immersion. You reload and sprint, and the character's sort of gun is it's jumping around a bit, and he's grabbing the mag and putting it back in. There might be some really nice, and actually, what tends to happen in these conversations, and these conversations are often where these where ideas come out, and it's really interesting. Is like we go, okay, so we'll let you reload when you're sprinting, but actually it takes a little bit longer because your character's jumping all over the place, or your pistol, the pistol animation when you're sprinting is quite nice. It holds the gun up.
Yeah.
He's not his arms aren't free anymore. If you could see me on webcam, I'm moving my arms up and down like like an idiot. You can't. He's not able to run with quite such ease. So actually, the reloading takes a bit longer, and he's a bit more like he's fumbling with the weapon and the reload. So maybe it's 20% longer. Those things aren't necessary, but it's quite interesting in terms of immersion of how can we try and make this character controller feel. We're adding choices in, right? We're saying, if you need to get from A to B now, if you're trying to evade, let's say someone's rushing you, you've emptied your clip, you jump behind cover, and you realize that actually this isn't the best position to be in because they've got a shotgun, and the closer they get to you, the likelihood of you surviving this fight is just diminishing. So you're going to try and make a dash for cover, but you've emptied your clip as well. So are you going to, I think this comes from, are you going to dash for cover and then reload? Or are you going to reload and then dash? Or are we going to as we merge, let's say today we just go, right, reloading and sprinting, just a thing, done, dusted. You do begin, and obviously what we're then talking about is the cost of this system. The cost of that choice comes a hit to, well, conventions in general. You've come from a game where this is just totally a thing, and now, we've tried to be clever, and actually we end up making the character controller feel quite janky, and you can cancel reloads, and those, it is not fun when a reload fails. It is really, really bad.
A few of those at the moment.
So we have to weigh up that. Yeah, we have to weigh up those pros and cons, and I think at the moment the cons are enough that we need to look at it. I don't know how much of it is also related to reloading in general being a bit there's some bugs in there, the reload just cancel and stuff.
Yeah, reload sometimes just when you're walking cancel out.
Exactly, yeah.
And you reload and go to shoot and nothing's happened. And in addition to that, just because I might come from a background where a game like Battlefield where you can reload on the run, there might be other players that come from games where they really don't want to see reloading on the run because they prefer the immersion of not being able to do that. Likewise, I think maybe the environment plays a part at the moment, so there's not as much cover that you can have to reload safely. You're out in some quite open, barren areas at the moment, this stage of the Forge. So I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are on how the environment fits into these things that we've been talking about, like reloading and health and time to kill and so on.
Yeah, so the environment, really in many ways, and in my personal opinion, is the weakest link in the chain right now. So it's I'm quite glad that it's in the places it's in, because actually I'm learning more about the environment than I ever would, and if I were able to tomorrow throw a whole bunch of content into that game world and environment, we would have something that I think we would expect. But it being in such a limited place actually really highlights the importance of cover and variation in many ways. But you don't have a strong navigation, you don't have a strong compass, or the tower and the mountains do quite a good job, but it makes moving through the environment quite tedious and quite samey. And this is before we even get anywhere near, but you've not even fought anyone yet. You're literally just running through Scotland.
In quite wide open spaces at the moment for those parts too.
Yeah, so even before combat, it's a bit of a problem because it doesn't make exploration feel very rewarding. You're just, literally running through the same heathland over and over again it's slightly different shapes.
So some of those open areas, I think, probably could benefit from having like little streams that run through them, so you can actually run down a stream through the open area, and maybe someone can't see you if you're in that open area, but then you're in the stream and you can't see them either, so you've got a choice to make. Do you stay in the stream or do you hop out to see where people are?
Yeah.
And you could probably benefit from maybe some more rock features in some of those areas as well, a bit more variety with the landscape.
So we have a river tool in the works, but sadly, the complexity to building this world in a way that isn't. So if you look at how PUBG could throw a game world together as quickly as they did in a time frame, is that it's all hand placed, and there's actually a certain amount of speed to that, because you can go in, throw a building down, put a road there, telegraph pole, like cover, shack, mound, done. The problem with that is it's very inflexible. You can't change that. Or it's very expensive to change that. There's no carryover, right? Someone has to do literally the same thing again.
Gotcha.
So our game world set up in the complete opposite way. All the time we've spent is on tooling, not on placement. So I can refactor our entire island. So move the cottages, levels, our little ground rips, whatever content we're putting down, I can move that around very, 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 very quickly. But the cost to that flexibility is that the tools are very expensive to produce. So and once you have them, like amazing, but setting that up is where our time sink comes in.
Right.
So you'll see a very dramatic change. Like we're getting much more fidelity in how we can place things, like just static, like cottage sets. We're getting much more fidelity there, and so it won't look quite so like cut and dry. So the way they've been like kind of molded into the environment will be smoothed out a lot. But that is the reason that we have a very barren world, but very powerful tooling
in the long run.
And it's good for it's long term. Long term is amazing. Short term is quite bad, and that's what you're seeing right now.
Gotcha. So I guess what do you see going forward? What's the sort of immediate changes we might expect to see in the landscape?
Yeah.
And as it progresses, what should we expect to see as we move through the Forge?
Yeah, so I'm going to try, me and the environment guys, basically, so you're aware, our benchmark is E3. That island that we had, that we still have, where all the trailer footage came from, where some of that content that got leaked came from on E3, that is the kind of standard that we want as our baseline. So even before we've put structures in there, the ground should never be as flat as it is. The amount of there's no occlusion at all. So where we have this is just a few examples, where we have an open piece of land right now, what we need to do is add divots in that, a bit like you're saying, like little streams. A river needs to go down the middle, and then we want cliffs that kind of or rock faces that meet it on the other axis. So we've now put a cross through that piece of landscape, and then we would build up slightly different foliage in each one of those quadrants. So now you're making a decision of down the middle, to the left, or to the right. Mm-hmm. And very quickly, this piece of what it was just heathland now has gameplay to it. And this isn't a particularly difficult thing to do. Our tools are there, but we have a problem in that, we're filling 8K at the moment, but then the 16K of content in this world. So it's repetition is going to be something that is likely to be found in the Forge. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you guys are going to be much more accepting of repetition than you are of simply what you have right now, which is just barren.
Yeah, I think that would be a fair summary.
So if we can try and get a couple of those, I'm going to try over the. We're going to make a big push over the next few weeks to put in, the cottages.
Mm-hmm.
Put in many more structures of similar size like that and dot them around. So yeah, that I understand the frustration, and your feedback is completely valid and it's shared between us. So we will do something about that very soon.
Yeah, I think one of the things about the Scottish landscape is it actually does have some repetitive features through it.
Yeah.
That are naturally occurring. So it has, like you were saying, rivers and then rock beds and things that cross those rivers repeatedly.
Yeah.
Forming sort of little valleys and gullies.
Sure.
And well, it almost looks strange because you end up with a whole series of little valleys that are kind of aligned and parallel, which make kind of great flanking opportunities. They're completely natural, so it's actually a normal, natural landscape that Scotland provides.
Yeah, if it's done right, repetition is not really too bad. You get that in the natural world because the thankfully, like, our landscape isn't repetitive. So as you move through the island, the very fundamental of the kind of land that you're walking on, and whether you're in the mountainous area, there's actually quite a lot of character to that, which means that, of course, if we put a cottage in the mountains, it's very different to putting a cottage just in the flatlands, in the lowlands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get that.
And what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on spawning at the moment, in terms of how far away you are to other players?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because just before I came on here, I had a look on the Discord and someone mentioned that spawning is quite brutal at the moment, and I think it's a pretty fair summary.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes I found that exactly that, you get put in amongst people and you're immediately into a gunfight, and you don't really have much choice about engaging in that or not. You're just kind of amongst it. Other times I've found that you've really got to travel quite some distance to either get to an outpost or to go and engage with someone. It sort of like throws you off to those spots occasionally.
Yeah, it's quite inconsistent.
Yeah, exactly. Inconsistent's exactly the right word. And I sort of wonder whether it might be a good option to have a little bit of choice. So you could actually go, I want to be close to people, or I want to be further away, so I've got opportunity to, say, go and loot for a while before I come and engage. So there's kind of some choice around where you end up.
No, that's interesting. That's not something that's come up. The choice factor. Your other concerns are, I share personally. So it's like always difficult getting the, or it's worth being specific about, like, when I think something is just me personally versus like the fundamental, like, theory or design behind it is away. But personally, I prefer fast-paced, like, running and gunning.
Me too.
So, and I think when I spawn far away from other players, I get a bit frustrated about that. But it's interesting that obviously different players will want different pace, or will want a different pace there. But choice is something that I wonder whether we can facilitate in a way that's not like you get to control exactly where you're spawning on the map.
Yeah, and so I know that down the track, deployment is going to change because as the capital opens up, we'll have the deployment hall that we can deploy from. We don't know much detail about that, and maybe you can't go into it in too much detail at this stage.
Yes, exactly. It's just a placeholder.
Yeah, so being a placeholder, I kind of wonder similarly about the radar system that's in the game at the moment, which every so often gives away the position of where people are on the map, which I think can be quite good for the short-term engagements in some way, because it means you can find people pretty quickly and don't have to wait.
Yeah.
And then the counter to that is those people that don't prefer the fast-paced rapid engagements, who want to go and find a sniper rifle, take their time, going up some back pass to, get to a cliff top, and then maybe almost have a camping style of play, how those people will be affected by a system that gives away their location. Will they still find enjoyment in the game if their location is given away quickly and then they're having to engage in a way they didn't want to?
Yeah, that's totally fair.
So I guess, how do you view what'll happen down the track as far as how people's locations are given away to others, and whether that changes as we move through the Forge?
No, I think if we can't engineer a system that facilitates the players, I think that we've not tried hard enough. The radar's really interesting. Like, that compromises a lot. Like, at the moment, these players totally have the ability to do that. But the problem is this radar kind of undermines that. So just for some context as to what the radar's up to and why it's there, it's really to just try and sell and show off the number of players in the map. That was a big thing we just wanted to do early on. Like Friday of release, when there was like 300 players online, and you pressed M and you looked at the radar, it was crazy.
Yeah, it was.
There was so many players online. That was fantastic. So that's one of the sort of primary features of it. But it's also actually there to it's very interesting. It's there to stop the problem of not knowing where players, because the map is so big and the spawning logic is well, it's not that the logic is limited, but the logic, just basically can't. We need to tell you where the player base is, roughly speaking, so that you don't end up, if you're the kind of player that wants action, having to run around for 20 minutes to find someone because you don't know what direction they spawned in. But I'm sure there's a way that we can sort this out. Like, for example, we've been talking in the office about blurring. Like, there's a few different solutions to this. So firstly, you have the duration of the ping. So at the moment, I believe it's every 30 seconds that the radar pings. It's either 20 or 30 seconds.
Yep.
We extend that, and it makes it harder for you to track down an enemy in real time. So you know where they were, but more and more time elapses between that, and their ability to deviate from that initial position, the distance they can deviate from that increases. Secondly, the accuracy of that ping. So if you're nearby someone, the ping is more and more vague. So someone's in your rough area.
Gotcha.
And that does a little bit in combating, losing some of that hide and seek aspect of the game and surprise. Rob, our one of our animators, was talking about it last week, saying he feels that it undermines quite a lot of that hide and seek that goes on. You know exactly where, like close range, you know exactly where someone is, and you know exactly where to look.
Yeah. So it's really a compromise between you finding people and also you avoiding being found, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the funny relationship that we're playing with here, where we've got a massive world, and a fairly standard spawning system, which without a radar ping is very, very slow paced, because you're spawning people even at 60 meters away. It's not that easy to find someone. If you try playing without the radar, like not looking at it, I've done it a few times. It's very difficult to find someone. Very difficult. But we can try and we can play with that duration, making it more and more ambiguous as to where people are. So you know where the pack is, but you don't. But the time that persists before you get another ping is actually quite long. So you just know the general direction. And then, of course, we can play with how accurate that ping is. It could be a lot more vague. it might only, it could show you where someone is within 20 meters, and that's it. And that could be across the whole map, or it could be something that scales based on your range from that player.
Yeah, and also I could imagine that as the tracking system comes into the game, maybe the radar can sort of put you in the general vicinity, but it's actually the tracking system that allows you to find the person on the map.
Yes.
And so the two kind of work in combo, but without the radar giving away where someone's exact location is. So I think we covered that pretty well. Now, when you and I first started talking, just before we started recording, you were saying to me that you quite like the idea of not only me asking you a whole bunch of questions, but you also wanted the opportunity to perhaps ask me some questions about, my thoughts on particular parts of the gameplay. Is there anything in particular you want to go over?
Yeah, so I've got some notes here. The feedback on healing, reloading, the amount of cover in the game world, the spawns, and lastly the radar. That's that gives me a lot to play with. It's really, really good to get that feedback. I've also got some bugs noted down here about the client side, some question marks on that, hit markers, and the spread not accurately showing what's going on there, and the pistol, we've fishtailed potentially, and then the reloads cancelling as a bug or not completing. But yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot here. How do you feel as a Battlefield player? And I think I absolutely adored Battlefield 3. I really, really liked it. And it's actually a lot of my inspiration for where we're like sort of, honestly, if you told me to pick one game in terms of gunplay and general ease and where the skill cap sits, I'd probably say Battlefield 3. Just because I find it so accessible. Like, I played it as a 15-year-old, and then when I was much more into it, and I was like 18, 19, I was still playing it, really, really enjoying it. I think I wasn't 15. I think I was about 16 or 17, to be fair. And then the latter was maybe 20, 21. But so as a Battlefield player, where do you feel the gunplay? Oh, as of yesterday, I know we've not had a lot of time to play this. Where do you feel it sits? Not necessarily. Where do you think it sits?
Yeah, good question. So I would say that, as far as I can tell, taking the ping issue into account, that close quarters combat at the moment is heading in that direction. So being kind of like Battlefield, and I really like that idea of it being accessible, perhaps a little arcadey, if that's the right word. I guess Battlefieldish is probably a better description. But I'm also very conscious that there are players who really like the slightly more realistic approach to gunplay, more PUBG style, maybe even more DayZ and Armour style, at the extreme for long-range gunfighting. And that's pretty hard for me to judge compared to Battlefield. Part of the reason being is that we don't have any optics in the game yet at this stage. So as a Battlefield player, I tend to use optics pretty much the whole time. So even anything over 20 meters away, so 20 yards, I'm usually using optics even on LMGs. So at the moment, playing in Mavericks, it's quite different from that because we're just using iron sights, and that's perhaps not something I'm quite as used to. So kind of summing that up, in close quarters combat, I think we're heading in the right direction to have that sort of Battlefield style engagement. But long range stuff, I think I need to wait until I can look down, an optic and then get a feel for it from there.
No, that's totally fair enough. I'm sort of being a bit cheeky and asking. I know I went into Battlefield when we were doing these initial weapons, picked up the AK-47, took off all the optics, and tried to get a kill past even 70 meters, and it was so difficult. It was so difficult. It's not particularly fair. It's just not easy. It's sorry, I mean, to be specific there, it's not particularly fair to even really begin to critique it, because it just doesn't, like, there's not a game where it works well. Like, but it's part and parcel of having, you know, limited zoom on a weapon. You know, the FOV is not super high in that ADS, so trying to put down shots at 100 meters is nigh on impossible. So, like, especially successive shots that would lead to a kill.
Yeah, I think at distance, I'd like to know that I can still hit another player, but if I'm keeping my distance, likewise, that if they hit me, I know that the damage will be lower, and then I've got a choice to either tactically go and engage them by maybe using cover to, you know, flank them or something like that, or I can just continue to avoid them without too much impact from that range.
Yeah, and that's perfect, because that actually extends that time to kill, and it gives players the ability to or rather, the counter to that, it removes the possibility that you're randomly gunned down whilst trying to traverse terrain between one objective and another.
Yeah, that's happening a bit at the moment.
There's a weird, like, you're basically, when you put that time to kill to the extent where it is at long range, optics, of course, will change that. But what we're doing is we're basically saying, like, combat is a soft opt-in. Like, you need to go, like, if you're not going to an objective, if you're not at cover and no one's near you, I guess what I'm trying to say in a really convoluted way, you control your range, and thus you control the time to kill.
Mm-hmm.
If you're far away from people, it's gonna be much harder for them to kill you, and you are making a decision to either engage with them and reduce the range between the two of you, or you sustain that range and you run away.
Yeah, and I think kind of two things there. One, if it's close quarters combat, you know, you need to be on the money, and you need to be fast and like a laser with, you know, returning fire. But at long range, other tactics come into it. You know, there's other skills.
Yes.
And other factors that,
and that's what the environment's falling down on right now, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think once that starts to develop, then we'll have an opportunity to see that there's more skills involved in the game than just being able to aim accurately. You know, there's a real balance to it. So, Lawrence, you know, we've covered a huge amount of stuff there, and we've gone quite a bit over the time that we'd sort of allocated, but I think there's a lot of detail there for people, and hopefully they enjoy that. I just want to take the opportunity to thank you so much for giving up your precious time, especially at this stage of the Forge, to sit down with me, go through all this detail, and really give us a, you know, really good insight to what's happening with the Forge and what's going to happen as we go forward in the next few weeks.
Sure. No, it's honestly, thank you. You know, this is exactly what it's about. We're not building a game for us. We're building a game for you guys. And it's not possible without conversations like this.
So there you go, guys. I hope you got a lot out of that interview with Lawrence Barnett from Automaton. A big thanks to him for taking the time out of his busy schedule, especially at this stage of the Forge. I'd also like to thank a couple of the Discord members for giving me a bit of feedback about the game prior to the interview. That was Sorrowy and Fancy Child, so thanks to those guys as well. If you found this video helpful, please consider rating, subscribing, and hitting that notification bell if you'd like to see more. I hope to do more interviews like this down the track. Thanks for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.